Welcome back to Timo's Dinky Detailing. Today I'm doing a London Toy 12N pickup truck. This is for the Dominion Day special, and using this toy because it's actually a toy made in Canada originally, although this one was probably made in the US. I can explain that. It's called London Toy, but not for London, England, but for London, Ontario. There was a company, an industrial company, making castings of all sorts, and they made this little offshoot making these small toy castings. They're very simple models. They have fiber wheels, and all the ones I've had so far, all the wheels have been in good condition. The designs are nice. They're simple. They're not designed after a real car, but they're attractive. I like the teardrop shaped fenders. These have the fiber wheels. And they've all survived. That's what's amazing, is that they actually survive better than the Dinky toys from the 40s and 50s in many cases. There you can see number 12M made in, and the Canada has been cut out because these dies were sold to an American company later on. But they did originate in Canada. So it's a Canadian toy in my mind anyway. And so it's a perfect candidate. Doesn't roll very well. Anyway, you can see that the toy is in good shape. It has had damage to the paint, and in fact been repainted, which you can see from overspray on the wheels. And what I'm going to do is if I want to save those fiber wheels because they're in good shape, and I would damage the casting by taking them off. And I know that from experience because this is the third toy that I've done. Last year I did a sedan in the Dominion Day one, and before that I also did a truck for carrying beer. So instead of stripping the paint, which would damage the fiber wheels, I've decided I'm just going to clean it up, sand it, file the damage that's on those fenders, and smooth it out, and then I'm just going to paint over top of it. So after sanding it, I clean off all the dust, and then it goes in to be painted. So I'm using, this is Tamiya Fine Surface Primer, and it's white. And to mix it up, I'm using a new technique. I showed it once before. This is a test plug. It's about $8 at Home Depot, and a piece of 3-inch ABS pipe that I happen to have lying around. So I just screw that on as it's meant to be used, and it's already a paint mixer. I just attach the threaded end into my drill, and this will spin. So I put the paint can inside, and then I spin it. And what happens is the little ball inside is spinning around, and it's mixing up the paint. I'm not entirely sure that this is the best way to mix the paint, but it's working pretty well for me so far. I've done it for a number of models now. My question is whether it's shaking it up and down, which is the way you shake it when you're preparing it just by hand. But this is much faster, and so far it's worked out pretty well for me. So into the spray booth, and I get the whole thing covered with the primer. So after painting it with the primer, first coat, I go in with the sandpaper, clean up wherever the casting has any flaws. Didn't really have any flaws. It's mostly where there's paint that has an edge that didn't come off. And here you can see in the windows there's some flash there. So that's pretty easy for me to take off. I should have done it before I put the first coat of a primer on, but better late than never. It's a pretty simple model. It's very simplified. It's not like Corgi toy or Dinky toy where they've gone to a lot of trouble to actually match a real vehicle. They've kind of come up with their own design. There's no openings in the wheel wells, so this thing wouldn't be able to steer. So now what I'm doing is I'm going to tape up the cab. Now this is a white primer, but what I'm going to be doing is making the cab white and the bed will be red, and then the fenders are going to be black, so it's going to be a tricky taping job. In fact, most of this toy is spent taping it up and getting that tape just right so that the paint won't bleed under it. So it's quite an involved task. So I'm using a toothpick to get that thing right down. Other places you can get your fingernail in there. And you can see I've taped around these fenders. Now this is a difficult way of taping fenders. Martin Dares, I watched a model that he had restored recently, and he used a different technique, and it's of course an easier technique. It's genius. The trick is to paint the fenders first, and then it's very easy to put tape along the top of the fender against the body. This is much more difficult because you have to make the tape all curved, but by taping the fender you're actually able to use a straight piece of tape. I thought this is genius and I wanted to go and do it, but then I came to the model and I said I'm scared to do it because I would have to paint the fenders first, and that it would mean that I start with the model black and start painting red and then white over top of it. So I'm kind of shy of doing it. I'll probably do it in the future because I think it's actually simpler, because when I did this model it's ridiculous amount of taping. There I'm using a flexible tape and it got me closer to the edge than the blue tape could do being cut. There you can see I'm using a pair of scissors I got at the dollar store. They're good quality. I figured these are really handy because they're very small and they can get in very tight corners, and they can indeed. Only weakness is that when I'm using the scissors, there's a lock that holds the scissors closed when you put them in your toolbox or into a sewing box. And what happens is when I'm just doing a normal cut, I tend to close that lock, and there, see, I had to undo the lock to take a second snip. So it's a little bit of an annoyance, and I'm not sure, I might take that little lock off of them because it's kind of getting in my way. So as I said, it's a big job doing this taping. So now the bed gets a coat of pink primer, because I'm going to be painting the bed red, and the cab has now been taped up so it's protected until the painting is complete. Now I'm using Mr. Hobby Aqueous red paint and leveling thinner to thin it for the airbrush, and leveling thinner just dries slower so that the paint has a chance to smooth out and become more shiny. And in this case I've already painted the cab white using matte white primer paint, so I'm going to have to paint lacquer over it anyway, so I really didn't need to use that leveling primer or leveling thinner, but just as well, at least it starts out already shiny. So after doing that, I removed the tape just for the parts where the red is actually against the white, which is not that much of it, and then I re-tape it again because now I'm going to tape the red part of the box up so that it doesn't get any of the black paint that's going on the fenders. And you can see I'm going with a cut piece of tape again, and it's a big elaborate job. Now this is going to be I want to choose a Canadian brand, and the brand I've chosen this time is another famous and iconic Canadian brand, which is Canadian Tire. So all the Canadians know about Canadian Tire, but if you're an American, if you live close to the border, you probably know about Canadian Tire. It's a hardware store, general hardware store now. It sells, but it's generally aimed towards automobiles, and it started out as a tire supplier. So here I'm using for the headlights, I'm putting this liquid masking liquid onto the headlights. So they'll be easier to paint later because they will stay white. Now it goes in, and I had trouble with all my other black paints, so I used a flat black. Because I thought, you know what, the flat black dries faster, it's much easier to work with, and then I'm going to be putting lacquer on this model anyway. So I'm starting to think, as it's so much easier to paint, I might start changing over to flat paints and then just put lacquer on the last stage. So the Canadian Tire started out, the Billy's brothers were co-founders in 1922. They bought the Hamilton Tire and Garage Limited, and they opened on the corner of Gerrard and Hamilton Streets in Toronto. So these guys were the very beginning. Now later they came on to Gould Street, Young and Gould, and they were providing mostly tires. Later on, they started carrying other auto parts, and it was kind of a counter. You would come up like an auto parts store, you come up to the counter and ask for the parts that you wanted. And I remember as a child, my dad took me to the oldest Canadian Tire that he knew of. Now here I'm putting the Canadian Tire logo, and I'm starting with the white part, and on the doors I don't need to put a white background, so I'm going straight with the logo. This logo is not the 40s or 50s logo. It's a newer version. This is a version that was, I think, came in the early 60s. It's very similar to the earlier ones, but the earlier ones were a little bit more complicated lettering, and I wasn't able to print those. It's too small for that detail. So this logo works a little bit better. And there you can see, I had to match the color layer on top of the white that I put there before. Now here I'm using the Molotow chrome marker, and it's a catastrophe. It's kind of blobbing. It's not staying on the lines, even though the casting is really clear. So I give up on that. I tried first with a smaller pen, and that's not really working for me either. And I have to fix up the paint. I do fix it later with some white paint after the stuff has dried for some time, so that it won't bleed through. But eventually, as always, I wind up going to a paintbrush. So I express a bit of the paint onto another surface, and then I bring my paintbrush, and that gives me much better control of this stuff. I have another solution for doing chrome. I'm going to show you that on a future model. At this point I'm still doing it with the Molotow chrome paint, which is pretty good, but you've got to brush it on. So I'm doing all of this brushing freehand. I'm getting better at it. I'm getting a lot of practice, and the brush I'm using here it has a longer bristles, which if you put them on an angle like this, it makes it easier to control the edge of the line. So I'm learning how to do this, and the airbrushing is even more difficult than the hand brushing, but have a look. I think I did a pretty good job on this one, all in one go. So I'm getting better at it. Now I'm using the pen again, and recovering those fiber wheels by painting on a hub. I know from earlier models it looks good with a chrome rim, so I'm just painting the rim onto these fiber tires. And then I come in with the black paint and painstakingly go around and brush the rubber onto the wheels. So it's really a painting job on this model, really. Anyway, I had fantastic luck with the painting and it went extremely well, so I'm pretty pleased with myself. Now I'm going and putting a windshield, and I make it out of plastic from packaging material. In this case, it's the lid for a box of croissants from the grocery store, and it's a nice, clear, smooth piece of plastic I can cut to my shape, bend it easily, and glue it in place. The interior, this is the interior from the truck, the O'Keefe truck that I did earlier, and I just scaled it up so that it would fit into the pickup truck. And that gets a steering wheel, and then it gets pressed in here and it stays in just by friction. I think it looks pretty good. So then it's a Canadian Tire truck, so I'm making it carry some tires. So these are Dinky and Corgi tires I have in my supplies. These are ordered from Model Supply, Steve Flowers in the Kingdom of Uck, and they're my stash for future models, but they're just going to go in here temporarily for filming the final turntable sequence. Of course, while I'm doing this, I'm remembering that I saw these ads when I was looking for logos. This is an ad that has this tire holding the hand of a coin, which is presumably $1 because it says we make your dollars go farther. And so it's the tire ran away with the coin. But anyway, I really love this graphic because I remember from my childhood, the Canadian Tire had a catalog. They had this kind of art in it. I remember this particular image, and I'll show you a close-up of it so you can see what it looks like. And I found a place where I can put it. So after doing all that stuff and putting tires, I had to dump them out, and I had to make up another decal, and this one goes on the back of the cab. And it looks fantastic. So this is where we began. This is this very charming little toy. It's funny that I never had one of these, any of these London toys, and they have a fair set of different toys. They're a cheap version of a Dinky toy. So let's see what it looks like now. I think it came out beautiful. It's a marvelous looking Canadian Tire pickup truck made on a casting that originally the casting came from Canada. In 2022, I made a Super Test tow truck, and Super Test is, of course, the other iconic company that I really like in Canada. Of course, this company is gone, but I did this one in 2020, so I think it's a nice companion model. Now, the music you're listening to in the background is called The Maple Leaf Forever. This was written in 1867, in the year of Confederation, and it was intended to be the national anthem. For some reason, it was never named the national anthem, and instead there was a song written a year later, O Canada, and the two of them coexisted all the way until the 60s. Before the late 60s, they finally decided they're going to use O Canada, which disappoints me because I really love this song. It sounds much more majestic. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Timo's Dinky Detailing. Until next time, be seeing you.